right. Well, speaking of silly government initiatives, I want to talk about the US Inflation Reduction Act. Now, I was fortunate enough to not be in the country when that came out, so I can be critical of it. Tell me, how on earth does something that has very aggressive policies regarding energy vehicles, insisting that it comes from local supply chains within the next couple of years, how does throwing a few $100 billion at a problem actually reduce the end cost for the consumer? But more importantly, how does something with such tight timelines actually rehome the manufacturing sector in the US? I don't see how it's going to do what Biden thinks it's going to do.
Well, I would suggest that you are an accomplished political analyst. Uh, I
Buttering will
would
get you
say
everywhere.
I would say that one of the few things that the United States still excels at is branding, which is marketing speak for bullshit. Um, the Inflation Reduction Act was a pretty title around something that should have probably been called the Inflation Exacerbation Act. If you take the Inflation Exacerbation Act and then you marry it with the 2023 budget, which is the most ungodly spending bill I have ever seen in 50 years of being horrified at my government's expenditures, uh, you have a well, let's just say if I was looking at it from the outside, I would just laugh. Sadly, of course, I am what they would call a citizen, and I call chattel. I'm one of the intended victims of the Inflation Exacerbation Act and the 2023 budget. I think around the world, people need to be concerned about this because the United States continues to drive the world's economy. The United States is still the world's mouth. We provide 23% of world GDP. And when you have a budget like the United States budget, which forecasts a $2 trillion deficit, may it only be that small, while continuing to increase off balance sheet and on balance sheet liabilities that already exceed, including off balance sheet liabilities, $120 trillion. The entire world, not just the United States, has reason to be concerned. Uh, it's not my want, but I think I actually understate the problem. I try to do it with arithmetic rather than adjectives. But the truth is that if you purport that you're going to control inflation with on balance sheet and off balance sheet liabilities exceeding $120 trillion and a $2 trillion deficit, I guess you're misleading dumb people. And I guess you're ignoring people who can do arithmetic. Sadly, I guess those are two disproportionate populations. But it actually is serious. It probably is. It probably isn't serious until it is. But it's very difficult for me to see how you reconcile um, that contradiction, Shay. I don't see them having the ability to borrow all of the deficit uh, at interest rate levels that exist today, which is to say, if you are running 7 or 8% CPI stated inflation and you're paying 4% on a treasury, what you're saying to the lender is you should be willing to accept a 3% compound annual negative real rate of return on your lending. From my point of view, no thank you. I get that arithmetic. So if you run a $2 trillion deficit, and by the way, the deficit will be higher because the $2 trillion deficit uses last year's interest rate as the implied interest rate on this year's debt. uh, it would seem to me that the only way that you deal with that is that you print. And if you make more of something, you certainly don't increase its value. I guess you understand in a very full sense what I think of the Inflation Reduction Act.
That was a fantastic answer, and it was better than I could have actually hoped for. Also, as a It's always fun to comment on another country's politics when it's not your own problem. Down here in Australia, we've got plenty of our own problems, I can assure you. We
You
can
know,
save the
that's so
comment.
true. When you look at another country's troubles, they become comical because you don't think that you bear any responsibility for it. My friend Bill Bonner says he always likes to think about American politics when he's in Argentina or Ireland because he doesn't feel American then and he feels less responsible for his own conundrum. And I certainly agree with that. I've made it a point not to criticize countries where I'm not a direct or an indirect taxpayer. Sadly, because I've been an investor for many years, that leaves me lots of targets of opportunity.
I like the caveat. Now, let's bring this back to an investor case. I've got two questions for you to round out today.